A lot of these differences are structured very early in life. In a way, if you like, the parental experience of adversity, how tough life is or how easy it is passed on to children, whether through maternal depression or parents being bad-tempered with their kids because they've had a hard day or just being too tired at the end of the day. And these have very powerful effects, programming children's development, which we know a lot about now. But that's early sensitivity isn't just an evolutionary mistake. It exists again in many different species. Even seedlings, there's an early adaptive process to the kind of environment they're growing up in. But for humans, the adaptation is to the quality of social relations. And so early life, how nurturing or how much conflict, how much attention you get, is a taster of the kind of world you may be growing up in. Are you growing up in a world where you have to fight for what you can get, watch your back, fend for yourself, learn not to trust others? Or are you growing up in a society where you depend on reciprocity, mutuality, cooperation, where empathy is important, where your security depends on good relations with other people? And that needs a very different emotional and cognitive development. And that's what the early sensitivity is about. And parenting is almost, quite unconsciously, a system for passing on that experience to children of the kind of world they're in.
The great British child psychiatrist D.W. Winnicott said that fundamentally two things can go wrong in childhood. One is when things happen that shouldn't happen, and then things that should happen but don't. And the first category is the traumatic and abusive and abandonment experiences of my downtown East Side patients and of many addicts. That's what shouldn't happen but did. But then there is the non-stressed, attuned, non-distracted attention of the parent that every child needs, that very often children don't get. They're not abused, they're not neglected, and they're not traumatized. But what should happen, the presence of the emotionally available, nurturing parent, just is not available to them because of the stresses in our society and the parenting environment. And the psychologist Alan Shore calls that proximal abandonment, when the parent is physically present but emotionally absent.
I have spent roughly the last 40 years of my life working with the most violent people our society produces, murderers, rapists, and so on, in an attempt to understand what causes this violence. I discovered that the most violent of the criminals in our prisons had themselves been victims of a degree of child abuse that was beyond the scale of what I ever thought of applying the term child abuse to. I had no idea of the depth of the depravity with which children in our society are all too often treated. The most violent people I saw were themselves the survivors of their own attempted murder, often at the hands of their parents or other people in their social environment, or were the survivors of family members who'd been killed, their closest family members, by other people.
The Buddha argued that everything depends on everything else. He says the one contains the many and the many contains the one. That you can't understand anything in isolation from its environment. The leaf contains the sun, the sky, and the earth, obviously. This has not been shown to be true, of course, all around, and specifically when it comes to human development. The modern scientific term for it is the biopsychosocial nature of human development, which says that the biology of human beings depends very much on their interaction with the social and psychological environment. And specifically, the psychiatrist and researcher Daniel Siegel at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, has coined the phrase interpersonal neurobiology, which means to say that the way that our nervous system functions depends very much on our personal relationships. In the first place with the parenting caregivers, and in the second place with other important attachment figures in our lives, and in the third place with our entire culture. So that you can't separate the neurological functioning of a human being from the environment in which he or she grew up in and continues to exist in. And this is true throughout the life cycle. It's particularly true when you're dependent and helpless and your brain is developing, but it's true even in adults and even at the end of life.